Chapter 6. The Philosopher's Journey to the Sunlit Truth. After a lengthy argument, the true and false philosophers have finally become clear. However, if we had focused solely on this subject, we might have had a better view of both groups. Nonetheless, there are other questions that need to be addressed, particularly regarding the difference between the lives of the just and the unjust. The next question, then, is which of the two classes, philosophers or those who wander in the realm of the many and variable things, should rule our state? The answer lies in determining which class is best able to guard the laws and institutions of our state. The guardians, who are responsible for keeping order, should have eyes rather than no eyes. Those who lack knowledge and a clear understanding of true being are like blind individuals. Therefore, it would be more appropriate for those who possess knowledge and truth to be our guardians. Now, let us consider how these individuals can unite their knowledge and virtues. First, we need to understand the nature of the philosopher. Once we have a clear understanding of this, we can acknowledge that a union of these qualities is possible and that only those who possess them should be rulers in the state. The philosopher's nature is one that seeks knowledge of the eternal nature, unaffected by generation and corruption. They are lovers of all true being and are unwilling to renounce any part of it. Additionally, they possess the quality of truthfulness and detest falsehood. They love the truth and cannot help but love everything related to it. Wisdom and truth are closely related, and a true lover of wisdom cannot also be a lover of falsehood. Therefore, the lover of learning desires all truth from a young age. However, it is important to note that strong desires in one direction may weaken desires in other areas, like a stream that has been diverted into a different channel. True. He whose desires are drawn towards knowledge in every form will be absorbed in the pleasures of the soul, and will hardly feel bodily pleasure, if he be a true philosopher and not a fake one. That is most certain. Such an individual is sure to be moderate and the opposite of greedy, for the reasons which make another person desirous of having and spending, have no place in his character. Very true. Another criterion of the philosophical nature has also to be considered. What is that? Asked the person, pointing to something in the distance. There should be no secret corner of stinginess. Nothing can be more antagonistic than meanness to a soul which is ever longing after the whole of things both divine and human. I agree, replied the other person. Then how can someone who has greatness of mind and is the spectator of all time and all existence think much of human life? They cannot, said the first person. Or can such an individual consider death fearful? No, indeed, answered the second person. Then the cowardly and mean nature has no part in true philosophy? Certainly not, affirmed the first person. Or again, can he who is harmoniously constituted, who is not greedy or mean, or a bragger, or a coward, can he, I say, ever be unjust or hard in his dealings? Impossible, said the second person. Then you will soon observe whether a man is just and gentle, or rude and unsociable. These are the signs which distinguish even in youth the philosophical nature from the unphilosophical. That's true, agreed the first person. There is another point which should be remarked. What point? Asked the second person. Whether he has or has not a pleasure in learning, for no one will love that which gives him pain, and in which after much toil he makes little progress. Certainly not, replied the second person. And again, if he is forgetful and retains nothing of what he learns, will he not be an empty vessel? That is certain, acknowledged the first person. Laboring in vain, he must end up hating himself and his fruitless occupation? Yes, said the second person. Then a soul, which forgets, cannot be ranked among genuine philosophic natures. We must insist that the philosopher should have a good memory? Certainly, agreed the first person. And once more, the inharmonious and unseemly nature can only tend to disproportion? Undoubtedly, replied the second person. And do you consider truth to be akin to proportion or to disproportion? To proportion, answered the first person. Then, besides other qualities, we must try to find a naturally well-proportioned and gracious mind, which will move spontaneously towards the true being of everything. Certainly, said the second person. Well, and do not all these qualities, which we have been enumerating, go together, and are they not, in a manner, necessary to a soul, which is to have a full and perfect participation of being? They are absolutely necessary, replied the first person. And must not that be a blameless study, which he only can pursue who has the gift of a good memory, and is quick to learn, noble, gracious, the friend of truth, justice, courage, temperance, who are his kindred? The god of jealousy himself, said the second person, could find no fault with such a study. And to men like him, continued the first person, when perfected by years and education, and to these only you will entrust the state. At this point, Adimantus interjected and said, to these statements, Socrates, no one can offer a reply, but when you talk in this way, a strange feeling passes over the minds of your hearers. They fancy that they are led astray a little at each step in the argument, owing to their own lack of skill in asking and answering questions. These little things accumulate, and at the end of the discussion they are found to have sustained a mighty overthrow, and all their former notions appear to be turned upside down. And as unskillful players of draughts are at last shut up by their more skillful adversaries, and have no peace to move, so they too find themselves shut up at last, for they have nothing to say in this new game of which words are the counters, and yet all the time they are in the right. The observation is suggested to me by what is now occurring. For any one of us might say, that although in words he is not able to meet you at each step of the argument, he sees as a fact that the devotees of philosophy, when they carry on the study, not only in youth as a part of education, but as the pursuit of their mature years, most of them become strange monsters, not to say utter rogues, and that those who may be considered the best of them are made useless to the world by the very study which you extol. Well, said the first person, do you think that those who say so are wrong? I cannot tell, replied the second person, but I should like to know what your opinion is. Hear my answer, said the first person. I am of the opinion that they are quite right. Then how can you be justified in saying that cities will not cease from evil until philosophers rule in them, when philosophers are acknowledged by us to be of no use to them? Asked the second person. You ask a question, said the first person, to which a reply can only be given in a parable. Yes, Socrates, and that is a way of speaking to which you are not at all accustomed, I suppose, remarked the second person. I perceive, said the first person, that you are vastly amused at having plunged me into such a hopeless discussion, but now hear the parable, and then you will be still more amused at the meagerness of my imagination, for the manner in which the best men are treated in their own states is so grievous that no single thing on earth is comparable to it, and therefore, if I am to plead their cause, I must have recourse to fiction, and put together a figure made up of many things, like the fabulous unions of goats and stags, which are found in pictures. Imagine then a fleet or a ship in which there is a captain who is taller and stronger than any of the crew, but he is a little hard of hearing and has a similar problem with his eyesight, and his knowledge of navigation is not much better. The sailors are quarreling with one another about the steering. Everyone is of opinion that he has a right to steer, though he has never learned the art of navigation and cannot tell who taught him or when he learned, and will further assert that it cannot be taught, and they are ready to cut in pieces anyone who says the contrary. They throng about the captain, begging and praying him to commit the helm to them, and if at any time they do not prevail, but others are preferred to them, they kill the others or throw them overboard, and having first chained up the noble captain's senses with drink or some narcotic drug, they mutiny and take possession of the ship and make free with the supplies. Thus, eating and drinking, they proceed on their voyage in such manner as might be expected of them. Those who support and assist others in their plot to take control of the ship from the captain, whether by force or persuasion, are praised as sailors, pilots, and able seamen. They insult and belittle those who they consider useless, calling them good-for-nothings. However, they fail to recognize that a true pilot must have knowledge of the year, seasons, sky, stars, winds, and everything else related to their craft to effectively command a ship. They must be the one steering, regardless of others' opinions. The idea of combining authority with the skill of a steerer has never crossed their minds or been part of their calling. In a ship that is in a state of mutiny, how will the true pilot be regarded by the mutineers? They will likely call him a talker, a stargazer, a good-for-nothing, of course. Adeimantus agreed with this. I then mentioned that there was no need to explain the interpretation of the figure that describes the true philosopher in relation to the state, as he already understood. I suggested that he should share this parable with the gentleman who is surprised by the lack of honor given to philosophers in their cities, and try to convince him that it would be even more unusual for them to be honored. Adeimantus agreed to do so. I told him to explain to the gentleman that while it is true that the best followers of philosophy may seem useless to the rest of the world, this is not their fault, but rather the fault of those who refuse to make use of them. The pilot should not beg the sailors to be commanded by him, as that goes against the natural order. Similarly, the wise should not go to the doors of the rich, despite what a certain saying suggests. When someone is ill, they seek out a physician, regardless of their wealth. Similarly, those who want to be governed should seek out those who are capable of governing. A ruler who is competent should not have to beg their subjects to be ruled by them. However, the current governors of mankind are different. They can be compared to mutinous sailors, while the true helmsmen are called good-for-nothings and stargazers by them. Adeimantus agreed with this comparison. For these reasons, among others, philosophy, the noblest pursuit of all, is not likely to be highly esteemed by those who oppose it. However, the greatest harm done to philosophy is not by its opponents, but by its own followers. As you suppose, the accuser claims that most of them are rogues and the best of them are useless, and I agree with this opinion. Adeimantus agreed as well. I then proposed to show that the corruption of the majority is also inevitable, and that this should not be blamed on philosophy any more than the other accusations. Adeimantus agreed. We then went back to the description of the gentle and noble nature, where truth was the leader that the true philosopher always followed. If he deviated from this path, he would be an impostor and not a true philosopher. Adeimantus agreed. I asked if this quality alone, among others, was not greatly different from the common perception of a philosopher. Adeimantus agreed. I argued that we have the right to defend the true lover of knowledge, stating that they are always striving for true being, not content with the mere appearance of multiplicity. They will continue their pursuit until they have attained knowledge of the true nature of every essence, merging and becoming one with it in the soul. Through this process, they will give birth to mind and truth, and truly live and grow. Only then will their labor cease. Adeimantus agreed that this description was just. I then asked if a love of lies could be part of a philosopher's nature. Adeimantus replied that a philosopher would utterly hate a lie. When truth is the captain, we cannot suspect any evil from the band that follows. Adeimantus agreed that this was impossible. Justice and a healthy mind would be part of the company, with temperance following. Adeimantus agreed again. I mentioned that there was no need to reiterate the virtues of a philosopher, as we had already discussed courage, magnificence, apprehension, and memory as their natural gifts. Adeimantus had previously objected that although no one could deny these virtues, many who possess them are clearly useless, and the majority are corrupt. This led us to examine the grounds for these accusations, and brought us back to the definition of the true philosopher. Adeimantus confirmed this. Next, we need to consider the corruptions of the philosophic nature and why so many are spoiled while only a few escapes. I am referring to those who were said to be useless, but not wicked. After that, we will discuss the imitators of philosophy and the kind of people who aspire to a profession that is beyond them and unworthy of them. These individuals, through their inconsistencies, bring universal condemnation upon philosophy and all philosophers. What are these corruptions? He said. I will see if I can explain them to you. Everyone will admit that a nature having in perfection all the qualities which we required in a philosopher is a rare plant which is seldom seen among men. Rare indeed. And what numberless and powerful causes tend to destroy these rare natures? What causes? In the first place there are their own virtues, their courage, temperance, and the rest of them, every one of which praiseworthy qualities, and this is a most singular circumstance, destroys and distracts from philosophy the soul which is the possessor of them. That is very singular, he replied. Then there are all the ordinary goods of life, beauty, wealth, strength, rank, and great connections in the state. You understand this sort of things. These also have a corrupting and distracting effect. I understand, but I should like to know more precisely what you mean about them. Grasp the truth as a whole, I said, and in the right way, you will then have no difficulty in apprehending the preceding remarks, and they will no longer appear strange to you. And how am I to do so? He asked. Why, I said, we know that all germs or seeds, whether vegetable or animal, when they fail to meet with proper nutriment or climate or soil, in proportion to their vigor, are all the more sensitive to the want of a suitable environment, for evil is a greater enemy to what is good than to what is not. Very true. There is reason in supposing that the finest natures, when under alien conditions, receive more injury than the inferior, because the contrast is greater. Certainly. And may we not say, Adimantus, that the most gifted minds, when they are ill-educated, become preeminently bad? Do not great crimes and the spirit of pure evil spring out of a fullness of nature ruined by education rather than from any inferiority, whereas weak natures are scarcely capable of any very great good or very great evil? There I think that you are right. And our philosopher follows the same analogy. He is like a plant which, having proper nurture, must necessarily grow and mature into all virtue, but, if sown and planted in an alien soil, becomes the most noxious of all weeds, unless he be preserved by some divine power. Do you really think, as people so often say, that our youth are corrupted by sophists, or that private teachers of the art corrupt them in any degree worth speaking of? Are not the public who say these things the greatest of all sophists? And do they not educate to perfection young and old, men and women alike, and fashion them after their own hearts? When is this accomplished, he said? When they meet together, and the world sits down at an assembly, or in a court of law, or a theater, or a camp, or in any other popular resort, and there is a great uproar, and they praise some things which are being said or done, and blame other things, equally exaggerating both, shouting and clapping their hands, and the echo of the rocks and the place in which they are assembled redoubles the sound of the praise or blame. At such a time will not a young man's heart, as they say, leap within him? Will any private training enable him to stand firm against the overwhelming flood of popular opinion? Or will he be carried away by the stream? Will he not have the notions of good and evil which the public in general have? He will do as they do, and as they are, such will he be? Yes, Socrates, necessity will compel him. And yet, I said, there is a still greater necessity, which has not been mentioned. What is that? The gentle force of attainder or confiscation or death, which, as you are aware, these new sophists and educators, who are the public, apply when their words are powerless. Indeed, they do, and in right good earnest. Now what opinion of any other sophist, or of any private person, can be expected to overcome in such an unequal contest? None, he replied. No, indeed, I said, even to make the attempt is a great piece of folly. There neither is, nor has been, nor is ever likely to be, any different type of character which has had no other training in virtue but that which is supplied by public opinion. I speak, my friend, of human virtue only. What is more than human, as the proverb says, is not included, for I would not have you ignorant that, in the present evil state of governments, whatever is saved and comes to good is saved by the power of God, as we may truly say. I agree, he replied. Then let me ask for your agreement as well to another observation. What are you going to say? Well, all those greedy individuals, whom the majority call educators and whom they consider to be their opponents, actually teach nothing but the popular opinion, that is, the opinions of their assemblies, and this is their wisdom. I could compare them to a person who studies the moods and desires of a powerful, strong animal that he feeds. He would learn how to approach and handle the animal, when it is dangerous or not, and what its various cries mean, and how it reacts to certain sounds, and you can imagine that when he has become skilled in all this by constantly being around the animal, he calls his knowledge wisdom and turns it into a system or art, which he proceeds to teach even though he has no real understanding of the principles or emotions he is talking about. He simply calls something honorable and something dishonorable, or good or bad, or just or unjust, based solely on the preferences and moods of the animal. He pronounces something good if the animal enjoys it and bad if it dislikes it, and he can't explain them any other way except that what is just and noble are what the animal needs, without ever having seen it himself or being able to explain to others the nature of either, or the vast difference between them. By heavens, wouldn't such a person be a rare educator? Indeed, he would. And how does someone who believes that wisdom is the understanding of the moods and preferences of the diverse multitude, whether in art or music, or, ultimately, in politics, differ from the person I just described? Because when a person associates with the majority and presents his poem or other work of art or the service he has done for the state to them, making them his judges when he doesn't have to, the so-called necessity of Diomede will force him to produce whatever they praise. And yet the reasons they give to support their own ideas about what is honorable and good are completely ridiculous. Have you ever heard any of them that aren't? No, and I'm not likely to. Do you agree with what I've been saying? Then let me ask you to consider further whether the world will ever be convinced of the existence of absolute beauty rather than many beautiful things, or of the absolute in each kind rather than many in each kind? Certainly not. Then the world can never be a philosopher? Impossible. And therefore, philosophers will inevitably be criticized by the world? They will. And by individuals who associate with the mob and try to please them? That's obvious. So, do you see any way in which the philosopher can continue in his profession until the end? And remember what we said about him, that he should have quickness and memory and courage and magnificence. These were the true gifts of a philosopher, according to us. Yes. Socrates, won't such a person, from early childhood, be the first in everything, especially if his physical abilities are like his mental ones? Glaucon, certainly, he said. Socrates, and as he gets older, won't his friends and fellow citizens want to use him for their own purposes? Glaucon, no doubt. Socrates, they will come to him, make requests, honor him, and flatter him, because they want to gain the power that he will one day possess. Glaucon, that often happens, he said. Socrates, and what will a person like him do in such circumstances, especially if he is a citizen of a great city, wealthy and noble, and a tall, handsome young man? Won't he have boundless aspirations and imagine himself capable of managing the affairs of Greeks and barbarians? And once he has these ideas in his head, won't he become proud and arrogant in vain pomp? Glaucon, certainly, he will. Socrates, now, when he is in this state of mind, if someone gently approaches him and tells him that he is a fool and needs to gain understanding, which can only be obtained through hard work, do you think that, under such unfavorable circumstances, he will easily listen? Glaucon, far from it. Socrates, and even if there is someone who, due to inherent goodness or natural reasonableness, has had a glimpse of the truth and is humbled and captivated by philosophy, how will his friends behave when they realize that they are likely to lose the advantage they were hoping to gain from his companionship? Won't they do and say anything to prevent him from following his better nature and render his teacher powerless, using both private intrigues and public accusations to achieve that? Glaucon, there is no doubt about it. Socrates, and how can someone in such a situation ever become a philosopher? Impossible. So, weren't we right in saying that even the very qualities that make a person a philosopher may, if he is poorly educated, divert him from philosophy, just like wealth and its accompanying possessions and other so-called goods of life? We were completely right. Thus, my excellent friend, all that ruin and failure that I have described of the natures best suited for the best pursuit is brought about. These are the natures that we consider to be rare at any time. This is the category from which come the men who cause the greatest harm to states and individuals, but also the greatest good when circumstances push them in that direction. But a small-minded person has never accomplished anything great, either for individuals or for states. That is very true, he said. And so philosophy is left deserted, with her marriage ceremony incomplete, for her own have fallen away and abandoned her, and while they are leading a false and inappropriate life, other unworthy individuals, seeing that she has no relatives to protect her, enter in and dishonor her, and attach to her the criticisms which, as you say, her critics utter, who affirm of her followers that some are useless, and that the majority deserve the harshest punishment. That is certainly what people say. Yes, and what else would you expect, I said, when you think of the insignificant creatures who, seeing this land open to them, a land well stocked with impressive names and flashy titles, like prisoners running out of prison into a sanctuary, take a leap out of their trades into philosophy, those who do so being probably the most skilled individuals at their own pitiful crafts. For, although philosophy be in this unfortunate state, still there remains a dignity about her, which is not to be found in the arts. And many are thus attracted by her whose natures are imperfect and whose souls are damaged and disfigured by their pettiness, as their bodies are by their trades and crafts. Is not this unavoidable? Yes. Are they not exactly like a bald little tinker who has just got out of prison and come into a fortune? He takes a bath and puts on a new coat, and is dressed up as a bridegroom going to marry his master's daughter, who is left poor and deserted. A most exact parallel. What will be the outcome of such marriages? Will they not be vile and illegitimate? There can be no question of it. And when individuals who are unworthy of education approach philosophy and make an alliance with her who is in a rank above them, what sort of ideas and opinions are likely to be generated? Will they not be fallacies, captivating to the ear, having nothing in them genuine, or worthy of or akin to true wisdom? No doubt, he said. Then, Adimantus, I said, the worthy disciples of philosophy will be but a small remnant. Perhaps there will be some noble and well-educated individuals who, despite being exiled, remain devoted to her. Or some lofty souls born in humble cities who disregard and neglect politics. And there may be a few gifted individuals who abandon the arts, which they rightfully despise, and turn to philosophy. Perhaps there are also some who are restrained by our friend Theod's influence. For everything in Theod's life conspired to divert him from philosophy, but ill health prevented him from engaging in politics. As for my own case, the internal sign that guides me is hardly worth mentioning. For rarely, if ever, has such a monitor been given to any other person. Those who belong to this small class have tasted the sweetness and blessings of philosophy and have witnessed the madness of the majority. They know that no politician is honest, and there is no champion of justice beside whom they can fight and be saved. Such individuals can be compared to someone who has fallen among wild beasts. They do not participate in the wickedness of their fellow humans, but they are also unable to resist their fierce natures alone. Therefore, realizing that they would be of no use to the state or their friends, and understanding that they would have to sacrifice their lives without doing any good for themselves or others, they remain silent and go their own way. They are like someone who seeks shelter under a wall during a storm of dust and sleet, while observing the wickedness of the rest of mankind. They are content if they can live their own lives, free from evil and unrighteousness, and depart with peace and goodwill, filled with hope. Yes, he said, and they will have accomplished a great work before they depart. A great work, indeed, I replied, but not the greatest, unless they find a state that is suitable for them. In a state that is suitable for them, they will flourish and become the saviors of their country as well as themselves. The reasons why philosophy has such a bad reputation have now been sufficiently explained. The unjust accusations against her have been refuted. Is there anything else you wish to say? Nothing more on that subject, he replied. But I would like to know, in your opinion, which of the existing governments is suitable for philosophy? None of them, I said. And that is precisely the accusation I bring against them. None of them is worthy of the philosophical nature, and as a result, that nature becomes distorted and estranged. Just as an exotic seed sown in foreign soil becomes denaturalized and tends to be overpowered and lose its true essence, so too does the growth of philosophy degenerate and take on a different character. But if philosophy ever finds a state that embodies her perfection, then it will be seen that she is truly divine, and all other things, whether they be the nature of men or institutions, are merely human. And now, I know you are going to ask, which state is that? No, he said, you are mistaken, for I was going to ask another question, whether it is the state of which we are the founders and inventors, or some other. Yes, I replied, it is mostly ours, but as I mentioned before, there will always be a living authority in the state who shares the same vision of the Constitution that guided you when you were legislating. That was said, he replied. Yes, but not in a satisfactory manner. You raised objections that made us apprehensive, as it indicated that the discussion would be long and difficult. And what remains now is the opposite of easy. What is left? The question of how the study of philosophy can be organized in a way that does not harm the state. All great endeavors come with risks, as people say, difficult is the good. Still, he said, let's clarify the point, and then the inquiry will be complete. I will not be hindered, I said, by a lack of desire, but rather by a lack of ability. You can see my enthusiasm for yourself, and please note that in what I am about to say, I boldly and confidently declare that states should pursue philosophy, not as they currently do, but with a different approach. In what way? He asked. Currently, I said, the students of philosophy are quite young. They begin their studies when they are hardly past childhood, only dedicating the time they have left after making money and managing households to such pursuits. Even those who are said to possess the most philosophical spirit give up when they encounter the great difficulty of dialectic. Later in life, they may attend a lecture if invited by someone else, and they make a big fuss about it because philosophy is not considered their proper business. Finally, when they grow old, in most cases, they are extinguished more truly than the son of Heraclitus, as they never ignite again. But what should their course be? He asked. Just the opposite, I replied. In childhood and youth, their study and the philosophy they learn should be appropriate for their young age. During this period, as they grow towards adulthood, the focus should be on their physical bodies, so that they may have them to serve philosophy. As life progresses and their intellects mature, they should increase their mental exercises. But when the strength of our citizens declines and they are no longer capable of civil and military duties, then they should be free to roam and engage in no serious labor. We intend for them to live happily here and to crown this life with a similar happiness in the afterlife. How truly sincere you are, Socrates, he said. I am sure of that. And yet, most of your listeners, if I am not mistaken, are likely to be even more earnest in their opposition to you and will never be convinced. Thrasymachus least of all. Do not create a conflict, I said, between Thrasymachus and me, who have recently become friends, although, indeed, we were never enemies. For I will continue to strive to the utmost until I either convert him and other men or do something that may benefit them for the day when they live again and have the same conversation in another state of existence. You are speaking of a time that is not very near. Rather, I replied, of a time that is insignificant compared to eternity. Nevertheless, I am not surprised that many refuse to believe, for they have never seen what we are now discussing come to fruition. They have only seen a conventional imitation of philosophy, consisting of words artificially put together, unlike ours, which have a natural unity. But a human being who is perfectly molded in word and deed, as far as possible, into the proportion and likeness of virtue, such a man ruling in a city that bears the same image they have never yet seen, not one nor many of them. Do you think they ever have? No, indeed. No, my friend. And they have seldom, if ever, heard free and noble sentiments, the kind that people express when they are earnestly and by every means seeking after truth for the sake of knowledge, while they look disapprovingly at the intricacies of controversy, which ultimately lead to opinion and conflict, whether they encounter them in the courts of law or in society. They are unfamiliar, he said, with the words you are speaking of. And this is what we anticipated, and this is why truth compelled us to admit, not without fear and hesitation, that neither cities nor states nor individuals will ever achieve perfection until the small class of philosophers whom we called useless but not corrupt are providentially compelled, whether they want to or not, to take care of the state, and until the state is similarly compelled to obey them, or until kings, or if not kings, the sons of kings or princes, are divinely inspired with a true love of true philosophy. I see no reason to affirm that either or both alternatives are impossible. If they were, we might indeed be justly ridiculed as dreamers and visionaries. Am I not right? Absolutely right. So then, if in the countless ages of the past, or at the present moment in some distant land that is far away and beyond our knowledge, the perfected philosopher is or has been or will be compelled by a superior power to take charge of the state, we are prepared to assert to the death that this is and has been our constitution, yes, and will be whenever the muse of philosophy is queen. There is no impossibility in all this, we acknowledge that there is a difficulty. My opinion agrees with yours, he said. But do you mean to say that this is not the opinion of the majority? I would imagine not, he replied. Oh, my friend, I said, do not attack the majority. They will change their minds if, not in an aggressive manner, but gently and with the aim of soothing them and alleviating their dislike of excessive education, you show them your philosophers as they truly are and describe their character and profession, as you were just doing. And then people will see that the person you are speaking of is not what they assumed. If they view him in this new light, they will surely change their opinion of him and respond in a different manner. Who can be at enmity with one who loves them, who that is himself gentle and free from envy, will be jealous of one in whom there is no jealousy? Nay, let me answer for you, that in a few this harsh temper may be found, but not in the majority of mankind. I quite agree with you, he said. And do you not also think, as I do, that the harsh feeling which the many entertain towards philosophy originates in the pretenders, who rush in uninvited, and are always abusing them, and finding fault with them, who make persons instead of things the theme of their conversation? And nothing can be more unbecoming in philosophers than this. It is most unbecoming. For he, Adimantus, whose mind is fixed upon true being, has surely no time to look down upon the affairs of earth, or to be filled with malice and envy, contending against men. His eye is ever directed towards things fixed and immutable, which he sees neither injuring nor injured by one another, but all in order moving according to reason. These he imitates, and to these he will, as far as he can, conform himself. Can a man help imitating that with which he holds reverential converse? Impossible. And the philosopher holding converse with the divine order becomes orderly and divine, as far as the nature of man allows. But like everyone else, he will suffer from detraction. Of course. And if a necessity be laid upon him of fashioning, not only himself, but human nature generally, whether in states or individuals, into that which he beholds elsewhere, will he, think you, be an unskillful artificer of justice, temperance, and every civil virtue? Anything but unskillful. And if the world perceives that what we are saying about him is the truth, will they be angry with philosophy? Will they disbelieve us, when we tell them that no state can be happy which is not designed by artists who imitate the heavenly pattern? They will not be angry if they understand, he said. But how will they draw out the plan of which you are speaking? They will begin by taking the state and the manners of men, from which, as from a tablet, they will rub out the picture and leave a clean surface. This is not an easy task. But whether it is easy or not, the difference between them and every other legislator will lie in this: they will have nothing to do with individuals or the state, and they will not create any laws until they have either found or made a clean surface. They will be very right, he said. After achieving this, they will proceed to outline the Constitution, won't they? No doubt, he replied. And as they fill in the work, they will often look upwards and downwards, meaning that they will first look at absolute justice, beauty, and temperance, and then at the human copy. They will mix and temper the various elements of life to create the image of a man, according to the image that Homer calls the form and likeness of God when it exists among men. Very true, he said. and they will erase one feature and add another until they have made the ways of men as agreeable as possible to the ways of God? Indeed, he said, they could not take a fairer picture in any other way. And now, I said, are we starting to convince those whom you described as rushing at us with all their might, that the painter of constitutions is someone like the one we are praising, at whom they were so angry because we entrusted the state to his hands? Are they becoming a little calmer after hearing what we just said? Much calmer, if they have any sense, he replied. Well, where can they still find grounds for objection? Will they doubt that the philosopher is a lover of truth and being? They would not be so unreasonable. Or that his nature, as we have described it, is akin to the highest good? They cannot doubt this. But will they tell us that such a nature, placed under favorable circumstances, will not be perfectly good and wise if any ever was? Or will they prefer those whom we have rejected? Surely not. Then will they still be angry when we say that until philosophers rule, states and individuals will have no rest from evil, and that this imaginary state of ours will never be realized? I think they will be less angry. Shall we assume that they are not only less angry but quite gentle, and that they have been converted and, for the sake of their reputation if nothing else, cannot refuse to come to an agreement? By all means, he said. Then let us suppose that the reconciliation has been achieved. Will anyone deny the other point, that there may be sons of kings or princes who are philosophers by nature? Surely no man, he said. And when they come into being, will anyone say that they must necessarily be destroyed? It is not denied even by us that they can hardly be saved, but who will dare to affirm that not even one of them can escape in the whole course of ages? Who indeed? But, I said, one is enough. Let there be one man who has a city obedient to his will, and he might bring into existence the ideal polity about which the world is so skeptical. Yes, one is enough. The ruler may impose the laws and institutions that we have described, and the citizens may possibly be willing to obey them? Certainly. And it is not a miracle or impossibility for others to approve of what we approve. I think not. But we have already shown, in what we have discussed before, that all of this, if possible, is certainly for the best. We have. And now we not only say that our laws, if enacted, would be for the best, but also that the enactment of them, although difficult, is not impossible. Very good. And so, with pain and toil, we have reached the end of one subject, but there is more to be discussed. How and through what studies and pursuits will the saviors of the Constitution be created, and at what ages should they apply themselves to their studies? Certainly. I left out the troublesome matter of the possession of women, the procreation of children, and the appointment of rulers, because I knew that the perfect state would be viewed with jealousy and is difficult to achieve. But that clever move did not help me much, for I still must discuss them. The women and children have been taken care of, but the question of the rulers must be investigated from the very beginning. We were saying, as you will remember, that they were to be lovers of their country, tested by pleasure and pain, and they were not to lose their patriotism in hardships, dangers, or any other critical moment. Those who failed the test were to be rejected, but those who always emerged pure, like gold tried in the refiner's fire, were to be made rulers and receive honors and rewards in life and after death. This is what was being said, and then the argument turned aside and veiled her face, not wanting to stir up the question that has now arisen. I remember perfectly, he said. Yes, my friend, I said, and then I hesitated to utter the bold word, but now let me dare to say it, the perfect guardian must be a philosopher. Yes, he said, let that be affirmed. And do not suppose that there will be many of them, for the qualities that we deemed essential rarely come together. They are mostly found in fragments. What do you mean? He asked. You are aware, I replied, that quick intelligence, memory, sagacity, cleverness, and similar qualities do not often come together, and that people who possess them and are also high-spirited and magnanimous are not naturally inclined to live in an orderly and peaceful manner. They are driven by their impulses, and all solid principles are lost in them. Very true, John said. On the other hand, those steadfast individuals who can be relied upon, who are fearless and unmovable in battle, are equally unmovable when it comes to learning. They are always in a state of indifference and tend to become bored and fall asleep during intellectual tasks. Quite true, Mark replied. And yet, we were saying that both qualities are necessary in those who are to receive higher education and hold positions of authority. Certainly, John agreed. And will these individuals be rare? Mark asked. Yes, indeed, John confirmed. Then the candidates must not only be tested in the labors, dangers, and pleasures we mentioned before, but there is another kind of test that we did not mention. They must also be trained in various fields of knowledge to see if their souls can withstand the highest of all knowledge, or if they will falter under the pressure, just as they would in any other studies and exercises, Mark explained. Yes, you are right in testing them, John agreed. But what do you mean by the highest of all knowledge? Do you remember that we divided the soul into 3 parts and discussed the natures of justice, temperance, courage, and wisdom? Mark asked. Indeed, if I had forgotten, I would not deserve to hear more, John replied. Do you recall the cautionary statement that preceded the discussion of these virtues? Mark inquired. What do you refer to? John asked. We were saying, if I am not mistaken, that those who wish to see these virtues in their perfect form must take a longer and more indirect path, at the end of which they will be revealed. However, we can provide a simplified explanation of them that is accessible to the public, in line with the previous discussion, Mark explained. And you said that such an explanation would be sufficient for you, so we continued the inquiry in a way that I found to be quite inaccurate. Whether you were satisfied or not, it is for you to say, John said. Yes, I and the others thought that you provided us with a fair amount of truth, Mark replied. But, my friend, John said, a measure of these things that falls short of the whole truth is not a fair measure. Nothing incomplete can truly measure anything, although people often become complacent and think they need not search any further. It is not uncommon when people are lazy. Yes, Mark agreed. And there can be no worse fault in a guardian of the state and the laws. Therefore, the guardian, John said, must be required to take the longer path and dedicate themselves to both learning and physical training. Otherwise, they will never attain the highest knowledge of all, which, as we mentioned earlier, is their true calling. What? Is there a knowledge even higher than justice and the other virtues? Mark asked. Yes, there is, John confirmed. And we must not settle for a mere outline of these virtues, as we currently have. We should demand nothing less than the most detailed and accurate depiction of them. Just as little things are meticulously crafted to showcase their full beauty and clarity, it is absurd that we do not consider the highest truths worthy of the highest precision. A noble thought indeed, Mark said. But do you suppose that we will refrain from asking you what this highest knowledge is? No, feel free to ask, John replied. But I am certain that you have heard the answer many times before. And now either you do not understand me or, as I suspect, you are being deliberately difficult. We have often told you that the idea of good is the highest knowledge, and that all other things only become useful and beneficial through their connection to it. You can hardly be unaware that I was about to discuss this, which, as you have heard me say, we know so little about. Without it, any other knowledge or possession is of no value. Do you think that possessing all other things is valuable if we do not possess the good? Or having knowledge of all other things if we have no knowledge of beauty and goodness? Certainly not, Mark replied. And you are also aware that most people claim pleasure to be the good, while more discerning individuals argue that it is knowledge? John asked. Yes, Mark said. And you are aware that the latter group cannot explain what they mean by knowledge and are ultimately forced to say it is knowledge of the good? How ridiculous! John exclaimed. Yes, it is ridiculous that they would start by criticizing our ignorance of the good and then presume that we understand them when they use the term good, Mark agreed. Most true, John said. And those who consider pleasure to be their good are equally perplexed, as they are forced to admit that there are both good and bad pleasures. Certainly, Mark acknowledged. And therefore, they must acknowledge that bad and good are the same? John questioned. True, Mark replied. There is no doubt about the many difficulties involved in this question, John stated. Indeed, there are none, Mark agreed. Furthermore, do we not see that many are willing to do or have or appear to be just and honorable without actually embodying these qualities? But no one is satisfied with the appearance of good, they seek the reality. In the case of the good, appearance is despised by everyone. Very true, John said. Should the best men in our state, to whom everything is entrusted, remain in the darkness of ignorance regarding this principle that every soul pursues and makes the end of all its actions? Mark asked. They have a sense that such an end exists, but they hesitate because they do not fully understand its nature or have the same certainty about it as they do about other things. As a result, they miss out on the good that other things offer. Should they remain ignorant of such a significant and noble principle? Certainly not, John replied. I am sure, I said, that he who does not know how the beautiful and the just are likewise good will be but a sorry guardian of them, and I suspect that no one who is ignorant of the good will have a true knowledge of them. That, he said, is a shrewd suspicion of yours. And if we only have a guardian who has this knowledge, our state will be perfectly ordered? Of course, he replied, but I wish that you would tell me whether you conceive this supreme principle of the good to be knowledge or pleasure, or different from either. I said, I knew all along that a fastidious gentleman like you would not be contented with the thoughts of other people about these matters. True, Socrates, but I must say that one who like you has passed a lifetime in the study of philosophy should not be always repeating the opinions of others, and never telling his own. Well, but has anyone a right to say positively what he does not know? Not, he said, with the assurance of positive certainty, he has no right to do that, but he may say what he thinks, as a matter of opinion. And do you not know, I said, that all mere opinions are bad, and the best of them blind? You would not deny that those who have any true notion without intelligence are only like blind men who feel their way along the road? Very true. And do you wish to behold what is blind and crooked and base, when others will tell you of brightness and beauty? Still, I must implore you, Socrates, said Glaucon, not to turn away just as you are reaching the goal. If you will only give such an explanation of the good as you have already given of justice and temperance and the other virtues, we shall be satisfied. Yes, my friend, and I shall be at least equally satisfied, but I cannot help fearing that I shall fail, and that my indiscreet zeal will bring ridicule upon me. No, sweet sirs, let us not at present ask what the actual nature is of the good, for to reach what is now in my thoughts would be an effort too great for me. But of the child of the good who is like him, I would fain speak, if I could be sure that you wished to hear, otherwise, not. By all means, he said, tell us about the child, and you shall remain in our debt for the account of the parent. I do indeed wish, I replied, that I could pay, and you receive, the account of the parent, and not, as now, of the offspring only. Take, however, this latter, by way of interest, and at the same time have a care that I do not render a false account, although I have no intention of deceiving you. Yes, we will take all the care that we can. Proceed. Yes, I said, but I must first come to an understanding with you and remind you of what I have mentioned in the course of this discussion, and at many other times. What? The old story, that there is a many beautiful and a many good, and so of other things which we describe and define, to all of them the term many is applied. True, he said. And there is an absolute beauty and an absolute good, and of other things to which the term many is applied there is an absolute, for they may be brought under a single idea, which is called the essence of each. Very true. The many, as we say, are seen but not known, and the ideas are known but not seen. Exactly. And what is the organ with which we see the visible things? The sight, he said. And with the hearing, I said, we hear, and with the other senses perceive the other objects of sense? True. But have you remarked that sight is by far the most expensive and complicated piece of workmanship which the creator of the senses ever contrived? No, I never have, he said. Then reflect, does the ear or voice need any third or additional nature to hear and be heard? Nothing of the sort. No, indeed, I replied, and the same is true of most, if not all, the other senses. You would not say that any of them requires such an addition? Certainly not. But you see that without the addition of some other nature, there is no seeing or being seen? How do you mean? Sight being, as I conceive, in the eyes, and he who has eyes wanting to see, color being also present in them, still unless there be a third nature specially adapted to the purpose, the owner of the eyes will see nothing, and the colors will be invisible. Of what nature are you speaking? Of that which you term light, I replied. True, he said. Noble, then, is the bond which links together sight and visibility, and great beyond other bonds by no small difference of nature, for light is their bond, and light is no ignoble thing? Nay, he said, the reverse of ignoble. And which, I said, of the gods in heaven would you say was the lord of this element? Whose is that light which makes the eye to see perfectly and the visible to appear? You mean the sun, as you and all mankind say. May not the relation of sight to this deity be described as follows? How? Neither sight nor the eye in which sight resides is the sun? No. Yet of all the organs of sense the eye is the most like the sun? By far the most like. And the power which the eye possesses is a sort of effluence which is dispensed from the sun. Exactly. Then the sun is not sight, but the author of sight who is recognized by sight. True, he said. And this is the person whom I called a child of the good, whom the good begot in his own likeness, to exist in the visible world, in relation to sight and the things that can be seen, what the good is in the intellectual world in relation to the mind and the things of the mind. Will you please clarify? He asked. Well, you know, I said, that when a person looks at objects in which the light of day is no longer shining, but only the moon and stars, they see dimly and are almost blind, they seem to have no clarity of vision, right? Very true. But when they look at objects on which the sun is shining, they see clearly and there is sight in them? Certainly. And the soul is like the eye, when it rests upon that in which truth and being shine, the soul perceives and understands, and is radiant with intelligence, but when it turns towards the twilight of becoming and perishing, then it only has opinions, and goes blinking about, and is first of one opinion and then of another, and seems to have no intelligence? Just so. Now, that which imparts truth to the known and the power of knowing to the knower is what I would have you call the idea of good, and this you will consider to be the cause of science, and of truth in so far as the latter becomes the subject of knowledge, beautiful too, as both truth and knowledge are. You will be right in considering this other nature as more beautiful than either, and, as in the previous example, light and sight can be truly said to be like the sun, but not the sun itself, so. In this other realm, science and truth can be deemed to be like the good, but not the good itself. The good has a place of even higher honor. What a wonderful beauty that must be, he said, which is the author of science and truth, and yet surpasses them in beauty. For you surely cannot mean to say that pleasure is the good? God forbid, I replied, but may I ask you to consider the image in another way? In what way? You would say, wouldn't you, that the sun is not only the author of visibility in all visible things, but of generation and nourishment and growth, though he himself is not generation? Certainly. In the same way, the good may be said to be not only the author of knowledge to all things known, but of their being and essence, and yet the good is not essence, but far exceeds essence in dignity and power. Glaucon said, with a comical seriousness, by the light of heaven, how amazing! Yes, I said, and the exaggeration may be attributed to you, for you made me express my fantasies. And please continue to express them, at least let us hear if there is anything more to be said about the similarity of the sun. Yes, I said, there is a great deal more. Then leave out nothing, no matter how small. I will do my best, I said, but I think that a great deal will have to be left out. I hope not, he said. You have to imagine, then, that there are two ruling powers, and that one of them is set over the intellectual world, and the other over the visible. I do not say heaven, so that you do not think that I am playing with the name Aurenas or Rados. May I assume that you have this distinction of the visible and intelligible fixed in your mind? I have. Now take a line which has been divided into two unequal parts, and divide each of them again in the same proportion, and suppose the two main divisions to correspond, one to the visible and the other to the intelligible, and then compare the subdivisions in terms of their clarity and lack of clarity, and you will find that the first section in the realm of the visible consists of images. And by images, I mean, first and foremost, shadows, and secondly, reflections in water and in solid, smooth and polished bodies and the like. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. Imagine, now, the other section, of which this is only the likeness, to include the animals which we see, and everything that grows or is made. Very good. Would you not agree that both sections of this division have different degrees of truth, and that the copy is to the original as the realm of opinion is to the realm of knowledge? Most certainly. Next, consider the manner in which the realm of the intellectual is to be divided. In what manner? Like this, there are two subdivisions, in the lower of which the soul uses the figures given by the former division as images. The inquiry can only be hypothetical, and instead of going upwards to a principle, it descends to the other end. In the higher of the two, the soul moves beyond hypotheses, and goes up to a principle which is above hypotheses, making no use of images as in the former case, but proceeding only in and through the ideas themselves. I do not quite understand what you mean, he said. Then I will try again. You will understand me better when I have made some preliminary remarks. You are aware that students of geometry, arithmetic, and the related sciences assume the odd and the even and the figures and three kinds of angles and the like in their respective branches of science. These are their hypotheses, which they and everyone are supposed to know, and therefore they do not bother to give any account of them either to themselves or others, but they begin with them, and go on until they arrive at last, and in a consistent manner, at their conclusion? Yes, he said, I know. And do you not also know that although they make use of the visible forms and reason about them, they are thinking not of these, but of the ideals which they resemble, not of the figures which they draw, but of the absolute square and the absolute diameter, and so on, the forms which they draw or make, and which have shadows and reflections in water of their own, are converted by them into images, but they are really seeking to behold the things themselves, which can only be seen with the eye of the mind? That is true, replied Socrates. And of this kind I spoke as the intelligible, although in the search after it the soul is compelled to use hypotheses, not ascending to a first principle, because she is unable to rise above the region of hypothesis, but employing the objects of which the shadows below are resemblances in their turn as images, they having in relation to the shadows and reflections of them a greater clarity, and therefore a higher value. I understand, said Socrates, that you are speaking of the domain of geometry and the sister arts. And when I speak of the other division of the intelligible, you will understand me to speak of that other sort of knowledge which reason herself attains by the power of dialectic, using the hypotheses not as first principles, but only as hypotheses, that is to say, as steps and points of departure into a world which is above hypotheses, in order that she may soar beyond them to the first principle of the whole, and clinging to this and then to that which depends on this, by successive steps she descends again without the aid of any sensible object, from ideas, through ideas, and in ideas she ends. I understand you, replied Socrates, not perfectly, for you seem to me to be describing a task which is truly tremendous, but, at any rate, I understand you to say that knowledge and being, which the science of dialectic contemplates, are clearer than the notions of the arts, as they are called, which proceed from hypotheses only. These are also contemplated by the understanding, and not by the senses, yet, because they start from hypotheses and do not ascend to a principle, those who Contemplate them appear to you not to exercise the higher reason upon them, although when a first principle is added to them they are cognizable by the higher reason. And the habit which is concerned with geometry and the related sciences I suppose that you would term understanding and not reason, as being intermediate between opinion and reason. You have fully grasped my meaning, said Socrates. And now, corresponding to these four divisions, let there be four faculties in the soul, reason corresponding to the highest, understanding to the second, faith, or conviction, to the third, and perception of shadows to the last, and let there be a scale of them, and let us suppose that the several faculties have clarity to the same extent that their objects have truth. I understand, replied Socrates, and give my assent, and accept your arrangement. Summary of Chapter 6. In Chapter 6 of the Republic, Plato takes us on a journey deeper into the nature of reality, knowledge, and the philosopher's role in society. Socrates engages in a profound philosophical discourse with his companions, focusing on three allegorical images: the allegory of the sun, the allegory of the divided line, and the allegory of the cave. The allegory of the sun, Plato begins by presenting the allegory of the sun, in which he likens the good, the highest form representing ultimate truth and reality, to the sun. Just as the sun illuminates the physical world, allowing us to see and understand it, the good illuminates the world of forms, enabling philosophers to grasp the highest truths. The allegory underscores the importance of the good in guiding the philosopher's pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. The allegory of the divided line, Plato then introduces the allegory of the divided line, a visual representation of the levels of reality and the stages of understanding. The line is divided into two unequal sections, with the lower portion representing the visible world and the upper portion representing the intelligible world of forms. Within each section, there are further divisions, illustrating the varying degrees of knowledge and perception. This allegory emphasizes the distinction between opinion and genuine knowledge and illustrates the philosopher's ascent toward truth. The allegory of the cave, perhaps one of Plato's most famous allegories, this section describes a group of prisoners who have been confined in a cave since birth, with their heads fixed in place, only able to see the shadows cast on the cave wall by objects passing behind them. These shadows represent the illusory world of sensory perception. One prisoner is freed and ascends out of the cave, gradually becoming accustomed to the sunlight, symbolizing the philosopher's journey from ignorance to wisdom. The allegory of the cave illustrates the philosopher's role as someone who has seen the truth of the forms and must return to the cave to help liberate others from their illusions. Chapter 6 delves into the metaphysical and epistemological aspects of Plato's philosophy, emphasizing the importance of the philosopher's pursuit of truth and wisdom. The allegories presented in this chapter provide powerful imagery for understanding the philosopher's quest for knowledge and the transformative impact of philosophical insight on both individuals and society.